Chapter 279. 4. Mother has gone missing. Lu Junyao took the stone out and held it in his palm. What is it? This was the special way he and Bai Jiyan were able to communicate with each other, and it was usually used in urgent situations. A normal and unremarkable-looking piece of rock, but it actually possesses amazing powers that could penetrate any kind of barrier or shield, allowing him to contact people outside unobstructed. Is Qingyu beside you? Bai Jiyan's voice sounded like it carried a faint tinge of anxiety and panic. Lu Junyao raised an eyebrow. She is. What happened? Aunt Lan went missing since this morning, and I had thought that she must have merely gone out for a stroll out of boredom. But so many hours have passed, and she still has not come back. I have searched everywhere in the Divine Healer sect, and was not able to find her. All the disciples I sent out have also told me that no one had seen Aunt Lan appear anywhere in the vicinity. Bai Jiyan seemed to be highly anxious and frantic, his breathing uneven. It looked like it had been quite a great shock to him. Lu Junyao cast his glance to look at the young lady beside him whose face had suddenly turned dark. He then said to Bai Jiyan, "Don't panic yet. Send more people out to go look. The Divine Healer sect's security has always been good, so we can eliminate the possibility that Aunt Lan was abducted. Could she possibly have encountered someone she knew and left with that person? I really do not know. Anyway, that senior MO is really terrifying now, and I will not be able to hold him down much longer. Can you hurry your way back here?" Bai Jiyan urged with strong urgency in his voice. "All right, I will." After ending the conversation, Lu Junyao then turned to look at Qingyu and said in a tender voice, "Don't worry. Aunt Lan will be found. Everything will be fine." Qingyu's eyes were lowered, and she did not say anything for a long while. After some time, she suddenly stared into the distance and started to say slowly, "Could it have something to do with the mine-free peak?" Had her mother wanted to stop her from going to the mine-free peak because there was something in her that someone had an interest in? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU as her mother's soul fragments have all been returned back to their rightful place. Then her cultivation powers should logically have been almost fully restored. Besides the hidden reclusive experts, no one in Cloud Heaven would be her match. So the possibility that she has been captured was moot. Then the only possible reason for her disappearance was she had done that voluntarily, or that she had decided to leave on her own accord. Because she had not wanted Qingyu to be exposed, she had made herself to become the bait, so as to shift their focus onto herself instead. And what awaited her could possibly not just be the same 10 years imprisonment like she faced before, but her departure this time might separate them for eternity, never to meet again, where all her memories, her past, would all come to an end. Chapter 280. 1. I have never believed in fate. Qing Lan Fei stirred awake from unconsciousness, feeling a little dazed as her eyes blinked groggily, her vision slowly clearing up. She tried to move her arm, and felt a wave of heavy weakness wash over her, causing her to crease up her brows. She turned her gaze to look down slowly, and that was when she discovered that both her hands and legs have been tied up by a single thick chain. She found herself in a cave filled with sharp icicles all around, and it was only when she woke up that she discovered how low the temperature in there was. The chill was visible in the air as a mist, and the ground was covered in a layer of frost. Where is this place? Qing Lan Fei summoned up her spirit powers in an attempt to break free from the bindings on her hands, but found that she could not feel the slightest ripple of spirit energy in her body, and was so weak there wasn't the slightest bit of strength left in her. Her face immediately turned pale, and panic crept into her heart. Her struggling shifted the chains that bound her limbs, which brought about a bout of dull clinking. "You're awake." Upon hearing that familiar sound, Qing Lan Fei's body stiffened, and she raised her head up slowly. Though they have not met for a few hundred years, the face of the person before her had not changed in the slightest, emitting an icy cold aura, distant and unapproachable. Her head of silvery hair lay draped over his shoulders unbound, except for an ice blue ornament worn over her forehead, giving off the feeling as if her entire person gave off a cold and aloof glow. Her complexion that was so fair it almost seemed translucent, and that exquisitely cold and beautiful countenance seemed to be almost frozen in time, never to age. 500 years ago, this person had looked like this, and 500 years later now, her countenance had not changed at all. Even Qing Lanfei did not know how old the woman really was. Qing Lanfei watched the person before her quietly, and it was after a long while that she moved her lips to call out slowly, "Master." That's right. This person was her master. The person who discovered that she possessed the flame element. The one who took her away from the divine temple for 10 whole years. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The woman was extremely beautiful, like a high and mighty celestial being who must not be profaned. The graceful arc of her chin lifted, with cold and arrogant nobility. Lan Fei, I've said before, that you will still come back here in the end. Incongruous dissonant to the woman's flawless countenance was that croaky and grating voice like that of an old woman in her 70s or 80s who had weathered through the hard scouring vestiges of life. Her heart like still water. Impossible to stir up a single ripple. It seemed she was born to be so cold and aloof. Her demeanor exactly the same towards anyone and everyone. But what could not be denied was that she was with Qing Lanfei for a whole 10 years. And she had not ceased contact with Qing Lanfei after the girl left. So to her, Qing Lanfei was not just merely someone who called her master, but more like her very own child. Chapter 280. 2. I have never believed in fate she was still different from others. Otherwise, she would not have pleaded on behalf of the girl. To let someone who should have died to still live. Master, for me to be back here, does it mean that I am still of use to them? Does that also mean that my daughter will not need to suffer all these? You're mistaken. Qing Lanfei's unfinished words were coldly interrupted by the woman's raspy voice. Her eyes calm and emotionless like pools of dead still water. She looked indifferently at the face that had turned deadly pale from having remained in such an icy cold place for a long time. She said slowly, pausing at every word. You are merely just bait. I've said that fate is something nobody can ever escape from. Just like the moment you turn traitor, you would have to pay the price. Hence, your offspring shall now inherit the destiny that you did not manage to fulfill back then. All of your remaining life will be spent here in this place. Qing Lanfei's eyes lowered, and the corners of her mouth tightened up scornfully. In the past I believed in fate as well. But she suddenly lifted her head, and the light shining out from her eyes was startling to see. Now, I do not believe in that a single bit. Master, would you believe that my life will not end here? And my daughter will not end up like me, to be haplessly used and manipulated by all of you? Seemingly stunned by those words, the woman actually came to show a rare moment of surprise. But very soon, her eyes filled up with compassion. Lan Fei, though several hundred years have passed but you're still as naive as before. A traitor who slipped out of control like you would never be seen a second time here in the Mind-Free Peak. You can just remain here to reflect and repent. I'm sure you've sensed that all the spirit power in your body is gone by now, and as time goes by, you'll find that your body will become weaker and weaker. That hollow and brittle bit of willpower of yours will not hold out for all that much longer. You are no longer that same Qing Lanfei from before. Upon saying that, the woman immediately turned around and left. Qing Lanfei closed her eyes slowly, sighing heavily in her heart. It was feared that all of them did not know that she had been brought here, to the Mind-Free Peak. What a pity. She finally came to be reunited with Jingyu after so much hardship, and they were again parted in such a short period of time. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Maybe the trials the two of them had to bear had yet to fully pass. Back from the time that she was mercilessly persecuted by Qing Luoyan, she knew that it was all part of things she would have to suffer. Even though she had been rid of her spirit powers, she was still no weakling here in Cloud Heaven. And Jingyu was also an expert with rare unfathomable cultivation. How was it possible that they fell prey to a surprise attack so easily? If not for the Mind-Free Peak's hidden hands behind it all, how could Qing Luoyan possibly have succeeded? And how could Jingyu be controlled that easily? To people who were no longer of any use to them, the Mind-Free Peak would really mercilessly oppress and persecute to the very end, to the extent they would kill with a borrowed knife so cleanly without leaving any loose ends. Chapter 280. 3. I have never believed in fate. Every time Qing Lan Fei thought of that, her heart grew bitter. In the end, she was really just a pawn that they had been grooming. Divine Healer Sect, because of Qing Lan Fei's disappearance, the atmosphere had been strangely stifling these days. Especially when Mo Jingyu had once again refused to heed any of their persuasion, and had completely exploded when he was stopped from going out to search for her. Wait, then pray tell me, just how long do I have to wait until? A day? A month? Or is it going to be a whole year? Mo Jingyu had not shut his eyes for several consecutive days, and his phoenix-like eyes were red and bloodshot, looking highly haggard. He stared fixedly at Bai Ji Yan before him, and spat out through tightly clenched teeth. Get out of my way while I am still able to retain my rationality. I do not want to have to hurt you. Senior Mo, I understand that you are worried about Aunt Lan's safety, but where are you going to start to look for her? We do not have a single clue, and I have already sent people to search all over the place. They will inform me immediately when they receive any news. Bai Ji Yan's devilishly handsome face no longer carried the usual playful and indifferent nonchalance like always, but was being dead serious and stern, which somehow gave the man a sort of convincing charm. But the person before him was not just any ordinary man, and it was clear that those words did not work on him in the least. I said to get out of my way. Mo Jingyu's face was dark, his words heavy and grave in their intonation. The aggressively tyrannical white glow of spirit power surrounding his body slowly flared out, like it was going to tear everyone who was trying to stop him into shreds. Seeing that, Bai Ji Yan quickly took tens of steps back in retreat. You've got to be kidding me. This guy here was known as Cloud Heaven's top greatest fighter back in his prime, and he instinctively knew that he might not be able to take the man on fully if they really came to blows. After all, as an elixir cultivator, he was not great at things like fighting. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. After Bai Ji Yan retreated, no one would naturally dare to stop the man anymore. Seeing that, Mo Jingyu was about to tear through the fabric of space and time to open a dimensional portal when a voice sounded behind him that caused him to freeze in his spot. Father, where are you going? Mo Jingyu turned himself around slowly. A petite white-clothed young lady stood a short distance away, her countenance exquisite and beautiful with a faint smile curling up the ends of her lips. Those phoenix-like eyes that were almost exactly like his shone with a tender glint inside. As they looked at him quietly, seeing his little princess in the flesh at such close distance, Mo Jingyu almost could not believe his eyes. If not for those eyes that looked almost exactly like his own, and those pristine white clothes she wore, he would have thought that she looked the exact same as Fei Air. Chapter 280. For I have never believed in fate, and Mo Jingyu still thought that he was hallucinating, until the young lady came walking one step at a time to reach right in front of him, and curved her lips up in a smile to call out to him again. Father. Mo Jingyu then slowly came back to his senses, the expression on his face still rather stunned. Your little you? I am. Jingyu nodded her head and said. Lu Junyao then came out behind her, his gaze glancing very briefly at Qingyu as he said, Make haste. If one's spirit leaves their body for too long, the kind of harm it brings will be highly severe. Qingyu acknowledged quickly as she looked at the tense expression on the man's face, and then revealed a sweet smile. Thank you. I will be quick, and nothing will happen to me. Mo Jingyu watched the two of them mime to each other, and was a little puzzled, his brows inadvertently furrowing together. What is going on with all this talk about spirits and flesh bodies? Lu Junyao scoffed in contempt. It's all because of you. She heard that you were going to leave from the Divine Healers sect to go look for Aunt Lan, and this little one here started to become worried about you. And as her flesh body could not leave that place, she had no choice but to expel her spirit consciousness to come all the way here to calm you down. What? Mo Jingyu's irises immediately contracted, and the shade of his face turned ugly. What utter foolishness! How dangerous is that? If your flesh body comes to any harm at this moment, your spirit consciousness will never be able to return. Speaking about that, Mo Jingyu could not help but turn to glare at Lu Junyao. She might not be sensible enough as she is still young, but are you just as senseless as well? I really don't know whether it's good or bad to leave my daughter in your hands. Lu Junyao was taken aback for a moment by those words. He seemed to have heard the man say that he would leave his daughter in his hands. He is not objecting against the two of them anymore? That was totally unexpected. Seeing the furious look on Mo Jingyu's face, as he gave Lu Junyao a tongue lashing, Qingyu gave a certain man who was obediently allowing himself to be admonished a sheepish and apologetic look, before she spoke up in a soft voice. Rest assured that I will be fine. A Yao set up a barrier all around my flesh body, so I will not be in any danger. Moreover, I will not be staying here for long. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Mo Jingyu was surprised for a moment, and before he could even open his mouth, he heard Qingyu continue on. Listen to me now. I know what you want to do, and I am also aware that Mother has not gone missing, but has gone back to where she originally belonged to. Am I correct? The gaze that Mo Jingyu was looking at her with was a little conflicted, and he suddenly found himself at a loss for words. As expected, she is aware of everything? Fei Er had tried all ways and means to try to conceal all of that. Unfortunately, their daughter was just too smart, and had seen that things were not what it seemed. Besides Mother, probably no one else knows how to get to that place. So what you should do most now is to firstly be calm. Don't forget that Mother did this not just to protect little Bei and I, but includes you as well. Chapter 281. 1. A visitor in the middle of the night. The things this last knows was much more than he thought. Mo Jingyu's gaze dimmed slightly, and it was a long while before he opened his mouth to ask. Then, what are you going to do? The corners of Qingyu's lips lifted as she slowly turned to look at Mo Jingyu. She then said in a scoffing tone, the person those people are targeting is me. So, only if I turn up there myself would their attention be shifted away from Mother, and their guard would naturally be lowered towards her. That will then be the time that will have to depend on Father's skills to go save the damsel in distress. After her voice fell, Mo Jingyu's face looked a little surprised, but his brows quickly knitted up. You are going there yourself? How can I allow that? Your mother fell into danger because she wanted to protect you, so how can you deliver yourself right into their hands? I cannot possibly agree to it. Towards his objection, Qingyu did not hold it against the man, but just arched up an eyebrow to say, since Father does not have a better plan than this, then we'll just do what I just said. Although she had always been docile and obedient before her parents, but when it came to something that she had decided on, no one would be able to stop her. Upon hearing that, Mo Jingyu could not help but feel a little indignant, but did not think it was appropriate to blow his top. He then turned to Lu Junyao, who had not said a single word all this time, and said, and you agree with what the lass is saying? What she wants to do will put herself in harm's way, as the mine-free peak is not a place that one can come and go as they please. Lu Junyao curved his lips up in a smile, his violet irises glinting with indiscernible mirth as he said in a low voice, the place of legend said to be a divine realm of the gods, frankly put, is a place that no one has gone to before, isn't it? Who really knows whether all those rumors are the truth or lies? Senior here was proclaimed to be Cloud Heaven's most highly skilled pugilist back then. But is it because you were asleep for too long that you've grown to become timid and fearful? Mo Jingyu felt a little peeved and indignant hearing those taunting words, and did not want to vent his anger out on his daughter. So he threw Lu Junyao a fierce glare. A little kid like you had better not get too full of yourself. Just because you possess a little capability, and you think you're above everyone else? What I said about the mine-free peak was told to me by your Aunt Lon herself. Tell me if that could possibly be untrue. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EUO. Lu Junyao laughed aloud. Why don't my senior tell us more? Qingyu nodded her head and piped in as well. That's right, Father. Tell me more about the mine-free peak, so that it will be easily to come up with a better plan after gaining a better understanding of the place. You too. Mo Jingyu's face turned an uglier shade. Why does he feel as if he had been tricked by these two imps here? He said that the place was highly dangerous, but the two of them were actually becoming more and more interested in the place instead. He had clearly told Fei Er that he would not let the kids know anything about this, as the grievances of his generation should not be shouldered by these children. Chapter 281. 2. A visitor in the middle of the night, but with the way things were, he really could not care so much. Fei Er has already sacrificed too much for his sake, and she has even put herself in such great danger. How could he continue to sit back and not do anything? Even their young daughter was being so brave, so how could he continue to hold himself back like that? In a certain territory in Cloud Heaven, a part of the still air suddenly contorted strangely before an enormous dimensional vortex appeared. A group of people came out from it, and the portal disappeared in a heartbeat. It was rather clear that it was a dimensional portal to Cloud Heaven, but here in the lower realm, very few people knew the location of this tunnel. In the lead was a tall and lean man dressed in black robes. However, the most striking thing about him was his head of silver hair that looked like snow, and his pair of dark green eyes that reminded one of a ferocious beast. His light pink lips were tightly pressed together, which gave his already cold and emotionless handsome-looking face an additional tinge of iciness. It was Qing Yi Li from the White Fens lands. The people following behind him were his closest aides, that he trusted implicitly, the same group of people who had followed him to the Feng family manor back then. A person from any place would more or less face some kind of obstacles when seeking to move on to a higher position, as that was a path one would have to tread as they moved towards greater power. But it seemed to be an exception for Qing Yi Li and his group. When they went through the dimensional portal, it seemed like besides taking a slightly longer period of time, they did not encounter much danger or anything strange. It was not known whether it was due to how well blessed their young lord was. A petite-sized young girl with 2 braids at the sides of her head then gazed with wide-eyed curiosity as she surveyed the surroundings, before she turned her eyes to look at the expressionless-looking man, asking in a crisp voice, "Young lord, where will we be going from here?" When the question came out from the young lady's mouth, the rest of the people in the group also cast a quizzical gaze onto the man. "We'll find a place to rest our feet first." Qing Yi Li's eyes narrowed slightly, as he said in an indifferent tone. "Leave that to me," another tall and lean figure said as he thumped his chest. Looking for a place to stay was something he was best at, and it was always the best one out of 100 places. Qing Yi Li did not say anything, his eyes gazing far into the distance. He had always known where that person had been. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. But he did not dare to stand before her again, because he was afraid that he would one day no longer be able to control the beast in himself, and come to hurt her. Even if there was a way for them to be together forever, he still did not want her to be hurt, not even the slightest bit. Chapter 281. 3. A visitor in the middle of the night, he would never allow anyone to come to hurt her, even if it was he himself. That just cannot happen. The expression on Qing Yi Li's face became gloomy for an instant. But they have really not met for a very long time. Night gradually descended. Because of what happened to Qing Lan Fei, Qing Yu did not let Lu Junyao come over these days, but made him stay to accompany Mo Jingyu, to prevent the man from trying anything in secret. Qing Yu had also discreetly and openly tried to probe for information from Qing Luoyan, but it seemed like Qing Luoyan did not know much about the Mine-Free Peak as well, and neither did she know when the Mine-Free Peak would come to open up. Qing Luoyan had only told her that when the Mine-Free Peak appears, a strange phenomenon will manifest in the skies before it reveals itself. That night, Qing Yu went to Qing Luoyan's chambers again to hypnotize her to sleep before walking back to her place. On her way back, she bumped into Tsang Jian, whom she had not seen for a long time. "Grand Priest, it's been quite a while since we've met." Tsang Jian had clearly seen her as well, but the color of his face did not look too good, merely stiffening the edges of his lips in a faint smile before walking away. It was thought he did not know how to face Qing Yu anymore. Thinking back to how he had pushed Qing Yu to Qing Luoyan's side in order to save himself, he had not thought that Qing Yu would come out of it safe and sound, and even win Qing Luoyan's trust and favor. As of that moment, he was just a reject abandoned by Qing Luoyan, a grand priest with an empty title, where all those people who had once fawned upon him to win his favor all the time had come to distance themselves from him, after discovering his current predicament, some of them even secretly ridiculing and sneering at him. However esteemed and highly regarded he was in the past, he had inversely become just as down and out now. Seeing the man's figure slowly grow further, Qingyu raised an eyebrow, the expression on his face indiscernible. It was thought that what he was feeling right now must be even worse than death itself. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU so used to a life of being revered by people everywhere, reduced to become someone that no one asked about in an instant. It was not just any ordinary disgust one would feel, but was the kind that was like a fish bone stuck in one's throat, stubbornly stuck and refusing to go up or down, but could not find anyone to vent out to. How could all of that be enough at all? From the moment that he turned traitorous, he was destined to come to a bad end. All of this was merely just a simple appetizer. Continuing to walk to her quarters, the two attendant girls standing at the door bowed slightly to her. Miss Yu Qing, both of you can be dismissed. You do not need to be here to serve me. We are all in the same position, so you do not need to be so respectful to me. I do not think I deserve it, Qingyu said with her lips curved up in a smile. Chapter 281. For a visitor in the middle of the night, but if the temple lord asks, I will tell her all about it. You do not have to worry that any blame will fall on you. Qingyu opened her mouth to interrupt the attendant girl's words. Although the corners of her lips carried the faint tinge of a smile, it could be felt that the young lady was not exactly a patient person. If they continued to persist in remaining here, the young lady might really become angry. The two attendant girls exchanged a glance with each other and decided that they should just give up, immediately bowing as they retreated. Who knew whether they are here to serve her or to keep watch on her? Qingyu scoffed contemptuously and then opened her room door before making her way inside. Although it was already deep into the night, she did not feel the least bit sleepy, her heart still thinking about the mine-free peak. Heard from Mo Jingyu's mouth, it was said that the place was highly mysterious, where no one knew where the place was exactly, but they called people in that place celestial envoys, because they possessed mystifying powers that mortals did not have. And people who came out from the mine-free peak were all entities with power great enough to rock the world. But they seldom came to appear before people. Or one might say in their eyes all other places besides the mine-free peak were too plebeian or lowly, that might hurt their highly noble status and identity. Even the highest-leveled realm like Cloud Heaven was deemed to be completely worthless in their eyes. Qingyu's cultivation in her previous life had already reached semi-celestial levels, and in the world she was in back then, few were able to be a match for her. Back at that time, if she had survived her heavenly tribulation, she would have been able to gain entry into the legendary void, the celestial realm, to become a pugilist holding true divine power. And when that thought came into her mind, she could not help but feel that all of that seemed a little odd. The mind-free peak and the divine realm of the void, could there be any link between these two places? An intruder has infiltrated into the temple. Protect the temple lord. Everyone be on the highest alert. A flurry of hurried footsteps suddenly interrupted Qingyu's train of thoughts, and she quickly snapped back to her senses, looking in surprise at the group of white-robed men passing by the outside of her window. What happened? Did she just hear that someone had managed to break their way in? This damned place was filled with danger everywhere. The security so tight that not even a fly could fly in. That was probably because Qing Luoyan had committed too many nefarious deeds and feared for her life, causing her to turn the divine temple into a stifling place like it was fortified with thick walls of steel. And someone had actually managed to break into the place. It wouldn't be Lu Junyao. That fella had always been able to make his way in and out without anyone knowing a thing. Not a single trace of his passing has ever been detected. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU and only people who possessed his level of cultivation was able to come and go as they pleased so freely. So who could have broken their way in here? As she was still contemplating on it, a soft noise suddenly sounded through her half-open window, and a figure then came into her room without another sound. That person had his back facing her, standing within the shadows where the dim candlelight could not reach, where only his very tall stature could be faintly made out. looking a little thin from the back. Qing Yu arched up an eyebrow, but did not sense any evil intention coming from the person, and she could not help but laugh out softly. You, sir, are really rather bold to dare to come in here. Have you lost your way, or did you come here to look for me? Chapter 282. 1. Can only be friends. She had just intended to make fun of the guy, and did not expect to see the man's body stiffen for a moment, before he spat out 3 short words. Look for you. The voice was cold and clear, feeling strangely familiar. Qing Yu was a little stunned for a moment, as she stood frozen to watch the figure turn around slowly, and then come walking towards her a step at a time. From within the shadows, his real face slowly came to be revealed. Those dark green eyes that looked like a wild beast's glittered exceptionally beautifully under the darkness of night. Qing Yu's eyes flared wide, incredulity filling her face as she murmured in a soft voice. Little Yi. It's really him? Ever since the time at the Faint Mist sect, when he left without a word, she had not seen him again. She had thought that he had gone to search for Qing Tianlin, but even when Qing Tianlin came to appear again after that, there hadn't been a single trace of this guy anywhere to be seen. He seemed to have changed, different from the previous life, keeping many secrets that she did not know anything about. Qing Yili looked at the young lady in front of her, who had a surprised look on her face, speechless for a moment. Actually, he had already intended not to see her anymore. But with things having come to such a state, where he knew where she was, he could not hold himself back and still came here in the end. But looking at her, she did not seem to be keen to see him. Qing Yili's gaze grew dim, and he said in a low voice, It's really nothing. I just happened to know that you were here, and I just popped in to come see whether you are doing well. Upon finishing those words, his footsteps shifted slightly as he sought to leave. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The expression on Qing Yu's face grew solemn, as she took a few steps forward to catch hold of the man. In a rather displeased tone, she then said, What? You think you can just come and go just as it pleases you? You vanished without a single trace for so long. Don't you have anything you want to say to me? Or do you now feel as if there is no need to tell me anything, as you are no longer my secret hidden guard, and has decided to keep a far distance away from me? I have not. Before she had even finished, Qing Yili's cold and expressionless handsome-looking face suddenly showed a look of panic. With a flustered look, he looked at her and quickly said, I will never want to leave you if you do not chase me away. Qing Yu scoffed coldly. When did you come to learn how to use deceitful words to deceive me like this? You went on to disappear for such a long period of time, and refused to tell me anything when you come here to see me, but said that you will never want to leave me. You are free to do whatever you want and I will definitely not want to interfere. Her words were intentionally incisive and sharp and said in a fit of pique. She knew this fella's temperament only too well, and if she was not harsh with him, he would never come to tell her anything. Chapter 282. 2. Can only be friends. With that thought in mind, Qing Yu turned around to walk away, fully intending to ignore him. Qing Yili immediately became frantic, and in a moment of panic, he actually hugged her from behind, his voice a little helpless as he said, Little Yu, don't get angry. I did not want to hide anything from you. Finding herself hugged from the back, Qing Yu's eyes glinted sharply as she quietly tried to break free. What right do I have to be angry with you? You and I have both been born into another world, so everything that happened in our previous lives do not count for anything anymore. You are now completely free to do whatever you want, and there is no need for you to tell me anything. It is not like that at all. Qing Yili turned the young lady around and stared at her with his dark green eyes, his voice dead serious as he said, No matter how much time has passed, little you will always be the most important person to me. I will never hold any secrets against you. I just don't know how to tell it to you. The aura around Qing Yili seemed to turn highly depressed in an instant. Qing Yu's brows furrowed deeply, and she was silent for a while before she slowly said, Just what could have happened to you? In the end, Qing Yili revealed everything to her, but throughout the entire process, he did not dare look into the young lady's eyes at all. Little you, I am actually not human, but just a werewolf that possesses human blood in me. Qing Yili's eyes were looking down, the expression on his face sad and gloomy. It was all not just a coincidence that I grew up around a pack of wolves. It was because I am of the same species as them. Speaking up till that point, he then laughed aloud in self-scorn. How could a person like me possibly stand right before you? The man's fair slender fingers suddenly covered over his face, his voice becoming hoarse, like it carried bitterness that no one knew about. I am the one who does not have that right, not you. It was not known how long had passed before a slightly cold hand came to grasp the hand covering his eyes, slowly pulling it down. The man's eyes that were green as fine emeralds sparkled with a clear reflective sheen, like they had been newly washed, looking like he had just cried. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Yu Qingyu looked at him, and then let out a sigh. So just because of that, you do not dare to come see me, and was unable to face me? Qing Yili did not say anything, his silence admitting to it. The young lady suddenly stretched her hand out to grab his collar, pulling his body to bend down slightly, before she reached a small hand up towards his head. She then mercilessly ruffled his head vigorously, like she was ruffling the fur of a little pet. Qing Yili's face was stunned in surprise, unable to react for a moment as he stood there staring woodenly at her. Will you harm me? Qing Yu suddenly opened her mouth to ask. Chapter 282. 3. Can only be friends. He suddenly snapped back to his senses, and took a moment before he shook his head. How could I possibly ever hurt you? This was someone he would seek to protect, even if he would get hurt. Qing Yu curved up the ends of her lips and then said, or shall I say, will you betray me? Or do things that's disadvantageous to me? I will never do that, Qing Yili said in a resolute voice. Qing Yu looked at him with her brows turned up in smiling arches. So, what are you so worried about? So what if you are not human? Little Burrow is a snake and I like him a lot. Little Yi, you grew up together with me, and you are a friend and companion I trust the most. So we will never ever drift apart and become estranged, will we? Qing Yili's body had turned a little stiff. It was not known whether it was because of the young lady's words spoken without any restraint, or it was because of the phrase. Most trusted friend. Friend. That's right. Just friends, they can only be friends. That was enough. Having made it clear with her words, Qing Yu went on to pour a cup of tea for him as she said, Little Yi, you said that you came here to Cloud Heaven because of Mind-Free Peak? Qing Yili nodded slightly. I promised my father that I will help him bring something back. But isn't there a limit on the number of people that can go into Mind-Free Peak? So people from the White Fen's land can go in there as well? Qing Yu asked with a rather surprised look on her face. The corners of Qing Yili's mouth tightened. The limit holds absolutely no meaning to powerful entities. As long as one has the power, will the Mind-Free Peak really stop them from going in? What you said sounds quite logical, Qing Yu said with a helpless smile. Qing Yili held the teacup in his hand, not drinking a single sip, but merely narrowed his eyes. Impossible to know what was on his mind. After a while he then said in a soft voice, You have to be careful. Huh? Qing Yili's fingers holding the teacup tightened slightly. Regardless whether it's Cloud Heaven or Mind-Free Peak, both of these two places aren't really that terrifying or dangerous to me. What I am more worried about is Qing Tianlin. Qing Yu's face that had been smiling suddenly became muted and restrained. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Qing Yili then continued to say, From what I remember, he is an utterly ruthless person who would avenge the slightest ridicule or humiliation suffered, where no one could possibly remain safely untouched after antagonizing him. I once went to find trouble with him in the White Fen's land before, but he did not choose to retaliate back then, but endured it silently. What do you think that implies? That he has something more important he is dealing with on his hands, and is unable to respond to your taunting? Qing Yu said in a contemplative tone. That's what I think as well. But hasn't what he wants the most all this time been you all along? Could he be prepping for a bigger and grander plot? When that thought came into Qing Yili's mind, his long sharp eyebrows suddenly furrowed up as a feeling of unease crept into his heart. Don't overthink it, Qing Yu said reassuringly. Maybe his focus isn't on me this time, and that will be just great. But I believe that he will never give up on you. You are, after all, his most ideal and favorite puppet. Qing Yili almost spat out those words in contempt, pausing at every word. Chapter 282. 4. Can only be friends in the past. It was not known how many of their blood kin Qing Tianlin killed in their clan because of Qing Yu. He was a stubborn and persistent maniac, and he would surely persist in coming up with more horrifying deeds. But the thing that made it more frightening was he had absolutely no idea where Qing Tianlin was now. An entire month ago, Qing Tianlin was already not in the Feng family manor. There was no trace of him anyway. All the things he did to me in the past, no matter good or bad, I have already repaid him with my own life back then. Qing Yu's gaze stared into an empty spot, looking like her thoughts had drifted very far away. Her voice was soft as she said, I am now a completely new person, who has a family I want to protect, and a partner that I want to be with forever. For their sake, I will not allow myself to end up like I did in the past. With Qing Tianlin, I have already decided that I do not want to have anything to do with him ever again. But if he still has not given up, then I will have to end him with my own two hands. Qing Yu's eyes narrowed up dangerously, with a steely and resolute glint. She had been on very good terms with Qing Tianlin when they were very young, and hence they knew each other very well. Never had she ever thought that they would one day end up like this. But the difference now was that Qing Tianlin has changed, and so has she. A part of the frost on the cavern wall suddenly melted like it had met with a strong blaze, slowly forming into tiny flowing rivulets of water that came to drip onto the sad and depressed woman's pale cheek. 1 drop, 2 drops. Finally, the long lush lashes of the woman's closed eyelids fluttered slightly, before she slowly opened her eyes whose vision was still a little blurry. She had remained in this place for too long, and her body had turned cold and stiff, with numbness creeping upon her. She wondered what it was like in the world outside now, and how many days had already passed. Maybe she should be more worried about herself instead. The place was called the Flame-Devouring Ice Demon, which was specially used to imprison traitors or prisoners who committed grave and heinous crimes. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Anyone who came in here would have no chance of going out ever again. With the starkly contrasting temperatures of both ice and fire in here, it was impossible for anyone to remain in this place for long no matter how high their cultivation was. Moreover, there's some kind of devilry at work in this place which silently eats away at a person's cultivation without them knowing, till they were reduced to a frail and completely useless weakling. Qing Lanfei's face was deathly pale, and slight traces of blood was caked on her badly cracked lips. She had long been used to fasting and abstinence, and it did not affect her all that much when there was no food or water there. But as her cultivation was deteriorating, she would soon become a normal regular human, with her entire body being endlessly chilled by ice and roasted from the fiery flames at the same time. She felt like she was going to die. Chapter 283. 1. The devilish voice in the dreams. But there were some things that she still could not help but worry. It was that lingering worry that allowed her to maintain her wavering consciousness. Have those people started to move? Are her children safe? A pair of white boots suddenly appeared in her line of sight. Qing Lanfei was taken aback a moment before she raised her head up to look at the person. It was a rather young and pretty lady who was at that moment looking down at her. Qing Lanfei's body was very weak, and she could only remain lying on the ground, unable to even summon the strength to sit up. But she seemed to know this lady, and her blurry eyes suddenly widened slightly when she saw the lady, quickly struggling as she tried to get up. But the iron chains that bound her limbs were too heavy, and she was unable to even sit up from the ground, the attempt only causing her wrists and ankles to bleed from abrasion. "Senior, don't try to move." When the young lady saw what Qing Lanfei was doing, she immediately held Qing Lanfei down. Her brows knitted up as she said in a whisper, "I came here in secret, and no one knows that I'm here. You do not have to worry." For someone who was so spirited and suave, when had she ever suffered such torment before? This flame-devouring ice demon is truly such a cold, bitter place. With Senior stripped of her spirit power core, and her cultivation in such a weak state, she will not be able to hold on much longer. No matter how strong her willpower is, her body will not be able to withstand it. Qing Lanfei tugged back the ends of her lips slightly, struggling very hard to attempt to put on a weak smile. Ingo, it's been so long. You have not changed in the slightest. Here in the Mind-Free Peak, the only person who has not completely lost all humanity. Senior, you should not have come back. There wasn't the slightest hint of a smile on Ingji's face, as her hands holding Qing Lanfei's shoulders quietly infused the woman with spirit power, to help the woman drive away some of the weakness in her body. Qing Lanfei's brows creased slightly as she then said in a soft voice, "Stop that right now. If Master finds out, you will be punished." Ingu did not pay any heed to the woman's words, but kept her eyes closed, and the transfer of spirit power through her hands constant. She suddenly came to ask the woman, "Is life out there good?" Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Qing Lanfei was surprised by the question, her gaze fixed on the young lady as her mind recalled back memories from a very, very long time ago. Ingu had been the same as her, already brought here to this place when they were still in their swaddles, but Qing Lanfei had been luckier, fortunate enough to leave the Mind-Free Peak when she was 10 years old. After that, although she still roamed between the two places, the Bright Moon Temple and the Mind-Free Peak, she still enjoyed lots of freedom. Ingu was the illegitimate child of a lowly female servant, and her mother died not long after she was born. Master pitied the young child, and came to take her in to keep by his side. Because she was blessed with high intelligence, Master made an exception despite her lowly birth, and accepted her as a disciple. Chapter 283. 2. The devilish voice in the dreams. The girl came in only just a few days later than Qing Lanfei. The two of them had grown up together from a very young age, and they trained together. Ingu had always been very diligent and hardworking, because she was very much aware of her status and position, where it was destined that she would never be able to raise her head high here in the Mind-Free Peak. Hence she needed to make up for it with 10, or even 100 times more effort, before she would have to chance to stand above others. She was a person of few words, and she seldom revealed her emotions. It could be said that her personality was cold and distant. But Qing Lanfei had never cared about the cold, expressionless face the girl always put on, treating her like her very own sister. Although Ingu had never said it out aloud, she actually remembered it all in her heart, and she had always respected this senior of hers. When Master decided to rid her senior of her spirit power core, and to throw her out from his discipleship, Ingu had then knelt there under the freezing snow for 7 whole days. But that still did not change her master's mind in the end. Qing Lanfei was forcibly stripped of her spirit power core, and when the pain was so great that she was almost going to lose consciousness, she saw the icy cold Ingu, who was never one prone to showing emotions, cry while she embraced her. That was the first time that Qing Lanfei saw her cry, even when the girl met with an accidental mishap while cultivating, and her meridians were severed, which caused her to bleed from all 7 orifices, which very nearly took her life. The girl had not once complained about the pain, like she was a monster who was incapable of feeling anything at all. But when she saw Qing Lanfei looking almost on her last breaths before her eyes, Ingu cried like a little child, almost losing her voice, pleading again and again for her senior to not die like that. Qing Lanfei had also cried. She just could not bear to leave this junior of hers who was as close to her as her real sister, though they were not related by blood at all. She knew that Ingu was not good at expressing what she felt in her heart with words, but her feelings could be felt from her everyday actions that showed that the girl treasured her just as much as she did herself. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. And when the time came for her to leave the Mind-Free Peak, the eyes that Ingu had looked at her with had been highly conflicted, but seemed to be tinged with a strange bit of envy at the same time. The last word she had said back then had been, "Senior, you must remain well, and do not come back here again. Never ever again." She seemed to be telling her that they would never meet again. Ingu wanted to go see the outside world so much, but she could not. It was as if there were invisible shackles that bound her body, trapping her, making it impossible for her to take a single step out of this place. So when Qing Lanfei was able to go out, Ingji's heart was actually filled with envy. But after many twists and turns over hundreds of years, she had still come back here. Chapter 283. 3. The devilish voice in the dreams. It was not known how long had passed when Qing Lanfei's face seemed to regain a sliver of color. She looked into Ingji's eyes and said in a tender voice, I felt that I have spent many happy years all this time. I have a husband who loves me more than his own life, and an obedient pair of children. There is nothing that is more blissful than that for me. Ingji's eyes dimmed. Do you know what it means when you're here in the flame-devouring ice demon? I know. Qing Lanfei smiled weakly. But I do not regret anything, because I have experienced the most wonderful things in the world, and I have absolutely no regrets. If you die, what about your husband and children? Ingo asked as her brows furrowed up together. I do not have a choice, do I? Qing Lanfei curved up the ends of her lips and said in a slightly scornful tone. Right from the start, they had never intended to let me off. They were just seeking to use the flame element to develop an invincible and invulnerable human weapon. I might not be their best choice, but they really do not have a more suitable candidate than me. When Master spared my life back then, it must surely be because there was still some use left in me. Inge clenched up her hands and remained silent for a long while before she opened her mouth to say, I will try to think of a way to get you out of here. Qing Lanfei smiled and shook her head. Do anything foolish, Inge. To be able to see you again, I am already satisfied. Senior. The pitch of Ingji's voice suddenly rose slightly, her eyes staring deeply into Qing Lanfei's with a light that was never seen before, like it was hope that had been concealed behind many hidden layers, but was finally spilling out unstoppably. Do you know, I am really very envious of you, that you can be so brave to choose the life that you want for yourself, in spite of how hard it was going to be, and never once retreated from your choice. I think, Senior can really carry the hope I hold in me with you, to continue to live so happily forever. The ends of Ingji's lips curved up in a smile, which really tugged at one's soul. I will definitely save you from this place. Upon saying that, she did not wait for Qing Lanfei to respond, but just turned around and left straight away. But the sight of her departing back seemed to carry a strange resolve that made one feel uneasy. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Inge. Qing Lanfei watched the figure that was gradually disappearing, and her fingers clenched up tightly as uneasiness rose in her heart. My good child, do not resist me, but give yourself up to me. At the end of that haziness, a voice seemed to be calling out to her gently, filled with a highly soothing power that comforted one greatly, wanting nothing more than to sink oneself into that gentle tenderness. Chapter 284. 2. A strange change happened. Everyone below contemplated on it for a good while, before a lean-figured old man in white robes at the back suddenly put on a wise look and muttered in a thoughtful voice. Could it be heaven's calamity? But the moment his words came out, scornful laughter broke out seemingly on both sides unbridled, like he had just told them a funny joke. The old man seemed to realize that he had made a fool of himself, and his face immediately turned awkward and embarrassed. How could he not be embarrassed? What kind of a moronic heaven's calamity would occur right smack at the intersecting borders of the 5 great powers? It was a highly prominent place of such great importance. It was clear to see that that was the work by humans' hands, all right? Someone must be attempting to incite some kind of provocation between the cloud heaven's 5 great powers, to stir up unrest and upheaval. A young man in black robes then stepped forward to first bow respectfully towards the raised pedestal before he opened his mouth to say, Temple Lord, I think that with something this strange that occurred so suddenly out of nowhere, instead of having all of us making all kinds of wild guesses here, why not we have the Grand Priest show us his capability, by having him go investigate it, to get an affirmative answer for us all. That was indeed a rather sound suggestion, and many people there immediately indicated their approval, turning their eyes onto the group of people wearing the blue robes of a priest. Standing in the lead, was Song Jian himself, who had remained quiet for very long. He looked as if he had lost quite a bit of weight, like he had not been able to rest well for many days. People who were in the dark might have thought that he had been slogging day and night for the divine temple, but the truth of the matter was actually because he no longer possessed the special powers of a priest, and was feeling fearful and worried that he had lost favor with Qing Luo Yan. Seeing that man suggest that they should have the priests go investigate into the incident with the corpses, Song Jian's face immediately changed in shade. His hands hidden within his voluminous sleeves tightened unconsciously, and for some unknown reason, his gaze subconsciously turned to look towards the raised platform, at the young lady standing just outside the layers of curtains. Seeming to sense the man's gaze on her, Qingyu lifted her head and looked at him, before a faint smile slowly came to show on her face. Song Jian's heart could not help but to constrict for a moment. Would she really extend help to him? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. After all, he had greatly praised and promoted the young lady before the Temple Lord previously, and that had led to her position of glory today. Although that had brought trouble onto himself, and he came to lose the Temple Lord's trust, this young lady must not be that ungrateful, and forget the things he did for her, or he will not let her off. Song Jian straightened his back, standing in his spot with a vicious glint in his eyes. Fortunately, that young lady did not disappoint him. As he stood there with his body tensed and his face grave, his mind almost about to snap, Qingyu suddenly spoke up. Everyone, all of us might have overestimated the severity of the situation here. Chapter 284. 3. A strange change happened. The young lady's clear and gentle voice rang out within the vast hall, drawing countless pairs of eyes to her in an instant. But in the very next moment, she was met with the bristling, furious glare of a black-robed old man who hollered, "How impetuous! A little lowly attendant girl like you actually dares to speak critically in such an important meeting of the Divine Temple? Is it because you think that winning the Temple Lord's favor gives you the right to be so arrogant and conceited?" That old man was a well-respected elder in the Divine Temple, who holds a rather high position. He was a person not prone to laughter, and a man of few words, a stern and serious character, who emphasized greatly on the hierarchy of rank and position, and the strict compliance to etiquette. To him, Qingyu's actions here was clearly a case of insubordination, audacious conduct that overstepped her boundaries. Hold your anger for a moment, elder, and maybe hear me out first before you decide whether to apportion blame onto me? Qingyu asked as she looked smilingly at the old man, seemingly not fearful of the fury showing on his face. The black-robed old man was just about to open his mouth to chastise the young lady when the voice of the woman behind the curtains sounded out softly. No harm hearing what she has to say. Since the Temple Lord has already spoken, the old man could do nothing but hold himself back and acquiesce quickly. "You Qing, let me hear what you think," Qing Luo Yin then said. Qingyu nodded her head slightly, and then turned to the people below to say, "The Mind-Free Peak is about to appear, and I think I do not need to say anything more about it, as everyone here is better informed than me with regards to this. Does this have anything to do with the incident regarding the corpses?" Someone then asked puzzledly. "Let me finish. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World." Qingyu looked at the person who spoke with a smile, and then continued on to say, "The Mind-Free Peak is said to be a divine realm, and the high level of mystery surrounding that place is clear to see. No one knows when it will come to appear, and no one knows where it will finally show up. But since it is a divine realm, it is only natural that something unusual would accompany it pending arrival to exemplify its extraordinary status. And at this time when the Mind-Free Peak is about to manifest itself, could a mysterious and incredible incident come to occur, or an unexplainable phenomenon happen to appear in the skies?" "You mean, the people there were all not that stupid, and they were naturally able to decipher what the young lady was trying to hint at with her words, but what she said was really a little too incredible to believe." "That's right. I feel that the appearance of the corpses could have something to do with the impending manifestation of the Mind-Free Peak. Because of that, it caused a shift or fluctuation that affected some life forms, which then cost them their very lives. And not because of what many here are thinking, where someone is intentionally trying to stir up turmoil in cloud heaven. Chapter 284. 4. A strange change happened after Qing Yu finished speaking. Everyone below was silent for a long while before the expressions of their faces were a little strange to see, because all of them felt that all that the young lady said sounded rather logical. If it was the mind-free peak, it could really explain that strange phenomenon. After all, nothing so mysterious has ever happened in cloud heaven in the past several hundred years. They were all speechless for a moment. In the end, it was Qing Luoyan who suddenly laughed out softly before she went on to say, "You little lass really has quite an extraordinary mind. To think that you have the exact same thoughts as this temple lord here. It looks like having you just be a mere attendant girl is such a great waste of your talents. The temple lord is too kind. I am merely making a wild guess here." Qing Yu lowered her head and said, her demeanor natural and unflinching. The people below could not help but sigh inwardly at those words. Hearing the temple lord say that, it seemed to mean that she was going to bestow a special position within the divine temple onto the young lady. When that thought came to their minds, some of them just could not help turning to look towards the man standing at the lead among the group of men in blue priest robes. Looks like the position of the divine temple's grand priest is now hanging by a mere thread. Since there is no objection from all of you, the matter is now made clear. From here, this temple lord will then decide on the candidates who will be going to the mind-free peak within the next few days. And you'll be informed of my decision when the time comes. I hope everyone will do your best to grasp this opportunity. We will not disappoint the temple lord wishes." After saying that, Qing Luoyan then raised her hand slightly from behind the curtain veil. Upon seeing that, Qing Yu slowly went inside and supported the woman as they left from the other side. Everyone in the great hall started to disperse, and there was no lack of hushed whispers among the people. That little lass from the lower realm is really riding high recently. To think that the temple lord trusts her so much. You don't say. Although the temple lord often asks for everyone's opinion during every meeting. But doesn't she always insist that what she thinks is right? I have never seen the temple lord in such complete agreement with someone's opinion before. It seems like even the grand priest Song Jian, who has been by the temple lord's side for so many years, did not manage to make the temple lord trust him that much, and it looks like the temple lord has not summoned him recently, right? Shoot, not that loud. Despite the hushed voices speaking in soft whispers, Song Jian was not deaf at all. He has always been concerned with how others looked at him, so how could he not be paying attention to his surroundings at this time? Upon hearing those words from the people around him, Song Jian's face was cold and hard as he walked out from the great hall without a word. But his hands within his sleeves were tightly clenched up, held so tightly that the veins on the back of his hands were bulging. Did he just let the wolf right into his house? Things have turned out like this due to his own stupidity. Sigh. He has been too careless. Since this Yu Qing did not know her own place, then she cannot be left alone. Song Jian's tall figure gradually disappeared from the sight of everyone coming out of the great hall. When he reached a place where no one was able to see him, the man's harmless and gently good-looking face soon came to be tainted with an indiscernible tinge of malevolence that seemed to forebode an incoming storm. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. It was night. The cold clear moon hung high up in the sky. A silvery white light pale as snow spilled into the house. A quietly beautiful and enchanting sight. The young lady lay quietly, half her face buried in her soft beddings. The silvery slanted rays of the moon cast into the room, and one could dimly see the other exposed half of the young lady's exquisite and flawless countenance in quiet and peaceful sleep, like an otherworldly fairy that had stumbled into the mortal realm. From within the shadows, there was suddenly another presence, a pair of eyes deeply watching the young lady who was fast asleep. Chapter 285. One sneak attack? Turn you so ugly you'll cry. The young lady was only thinly dressed as she slept, her long black luxurious mane splayed over her pillow. Asleep like that, she looked exceptionally innocuous and innocent, curled up in an unmoving bundle, which really melted one's heart to see. At least for the man in the shadows who had secretly slipped in there. He stood there watching without blinking, his deep and beautiful violet eyes filled with tenderness. Seeing a small hand of the young lady sticking out from under the covers, and remembering her cold body constitution, that always could not stay warm, the man sighed softly to himself before he tiptoed lightly over, thinking to cover her properly with the blanket. After he slipped her hand under the covers, he then discovered that she was really sleeping very soundly, surprised that there was no reaction from her at all. Something didn't feel right. Lu Junyao could not help knitting up his brows. The lass is always highly alert and guarded asleep or awake. How could she possibly be sleeping so deeply, completely unaware of her surroundings? Little fox. Lu Junyao stretched his hand out to pat her lightly on her cheek. There was still no reaction from her. He then turned over the young lady who was sleeping on her side. It was only when she was facing him that he saw that the expression on her face looked unnatural. Although she looked to be sound asleep, her lips were tightly pressed together, and when he looked more closely, there was a thin sheen of cold sweat on her forehead. At that moment, though her body was in a state of deep sleep, her consciousness was however fully awake. Just as she had expected earlier, she was drawn into a dreamy realm by that mysterious voice once again. But it was different this time. She was on her guard, and she would not be so passive this time. She followed the voice to go seek out the person behind it, and was at that moment battling the person. And her body was stiff and in such a state of nerves, because she had sensed that someone had come close to her flesh body. And that was why her body was showing a defensive reaction. But after discovering who the person was, she then heaved a sigh of relief. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. She had been worried that if she was not able to wake up for a good period from this, she might not be able to escape harm from any external danger. Now that Lu Junyao has come and discovered that something was wrong, he will definitely remain right there by her side, so she did not have to worry about her flesh body coming to meet with any harm anymore. As Qingyu's body came to put down her guard, the man who was holding her tightly then felt the tensed up and stiff body slowly start to relax, the expression on her face becoming a lot more natural looking. Seeing that, Lu Junyao felt a little surprised. It was probably a kind of spiritual connection, as he came to sense that the young lady must be dealing with something very important at that moment. He just waited quietly for the young lady to wake up, his gaze unwaveringly fixed on her, highly alert as he watched her closely. Chapter 285. 2. Sneak Attack? Turn you so ugly you'll cry. The person who was attempting to control Qingyu within that dreamy dream was actually an adorable-looking young girl who did not seem any older than 10 years old. Although she looked to be just a little child, her voice sounded highly mature. At that moment, her face was pale, and a sliver of blood trickled down from a corner of her lips, her large eyes wide as she stared, looking completely shocked. How is it possible? How could you not fall under the control of my hypnosis? Qingyu scoffed contemptuously. Using the same trick on me a second time? Do you know that intruding into someone's dreams is an utterly despicable and vile act? Or are the people from the Mind-Free Peak just a shameless and reprehensible bunch? What audacity! How dare you defile the Lord from the divine realm? The young girl immediately admonished in indignant anger. But very quickly, she suddenly seemed to realize something, and she went to ask in a surprised voice, "How did you know that I am someone from the Mind-Free Peak? How is that possible?" She has not revealed anything to the young lady at all, so from where did this little pipsqueak here come to know it? Seeing the young girl's face looking like she had just seen a ghost, Qingyu arched up an eyebrow, and her wicked sense of humor kicked in. She said in a slow, contemptuous voice, pausing at every word, "Not only do I know that you are from the Mind-Free Peak, I also know that you people want to sneakily capture me without anyone knowing a thing, to use the flame element in my body with its resurrecting powers to help you create a super invulnerable and invincible powerful fighter." At that point, as if she still thought that all that information was not yet enough, she continued on to say after a short pause, "Those corpses at the cloud heaven's intersecting borders. If my guess is correct, It is probably caused by your very hands. That is because you were injured a few days ago, and you needed a great number of live souls as replenishment for you to make a full recovery. I wonder if everything I just said is correct? Qingyu had just finished her words when the young girl fell back a couple of steps weakly. The expression on her face not only shocked, but was tinged with a bit of fear. From her reaction, it could be seen that all that Qingyu just said was correct and spot on. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. It was also highly probable that her evil and devilish technique of cultivation, through the devouring of live souls, was prohibited in the Mind-Free Peak, and that she was doing that in secret. Hence, when she was mercilessly exposed by Qingyu so thoroughly, the young girl suddenly became fearful. In reality, Qingyu's guesses had really not been all that far from the truth, but there was one point that she had gotten it wrong. The Mind-Free Peak was indeed trying to capture her, but not through such underhanded methods like this. This young girl here had accidentally overheard the conversation of her higher-ups, and that was why she took her own initiative to come capture Qingyu, in order for her to win merit, gaining favor, and be tasked with greater responsibilities. Chapter 285. 3 Sneak Attack? Turn you so ugly you'll cry. But she had not thought that she would come to be defeated for the first time in her life, and was forced to reveal herself right at the second. It must be known that what she longed for the most in her life was to be able to possess a normal body, a beautiful-looking body that was compatible with that enchanting voice. So if she were to earn herself great merit, it would then be possible for her to ask the higher-ups above to help her have her body reconstructed. But it was feared that her wish was not going to come true. Since this lass here has actually discovered her secret, she must then not be left alive, even though she will lose her chance to earn some merit. If her secret was exposed, she really did not dare imagine what kind of an end she would find herself in. The punishment might turn out to be even worse than being sent into the flame-devouring ice demon. Thinking about that, a vicious and malevolent smile immediately rose up onto the young girl's adorable-looking face. Her enchantingly melodious and dreamy-sounding voice was filled with chilling murder as she said, "Little lass, it is destined that you will meet with such tribulation. But you do not have to be afraid. I will not let you feel any pain." When those people died, their faces were still smiling so peacefully. Hearing that, Qingyu curled her lips up in a smile, her long narrow eyes filled with a radiant smile. "But I am really curious what goes through your mind when you devour people's souls in their dreams." "Oh right, you wouldn't know, because you have never seen what you look like yourself in there." Those strange words directed at her out of the blue caused the expression on the young girl's face to become shocked for a moment, before she went on to say in a sarcastic tone, "Do you really think that playing such petty tricks will make me let you off just like that?" "Petty tricks?" Qingyu arched up an eyebrow, a strange look on her face. She then moved her hand slightly, seeming to be holding something within her palm. She raised her hand up slowly, and then revealed the thing she was holding inside. It was a small and delicate little mirror. "Why not we have a look at what you look like here?" The smile on Qingyu's face deepened, and she turned the mirror to face the bewildered young girl. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You see, this is what you look like. Is it because you have not seen your own face for so long that you have forgotten who you are? Reflected in that mirror was not any petite and adorable-looking young girl at all. It was a face filled with horrifying pus-filled boils. A monster too terrifying to look at, its body covered in hard brown-gray scales, and with many hideous-looking feelers waving menacingly about. That was clearly a humanoid body, but it really looked unbelievably horrifying. It could not be ascertained what species of monster it was. One that people avoided like venomous vipers and scorpions. Its face disgustingly loathsome, absolutely frightful to even gaze upon. "Arg, that is not me. That cannot be me. A monster. That is just a monster." Chapter 285. 3 Sneak Attack? "Turn you so ugly you'll cry." The young girl immediately lost her mind. She was completely overcome with fright, her hands covering her shaking head as she cowered, her footsteps retreating backwards as she recoiled in horror. seemingly unable to accept the fact that the image of herself that she saw reflected in the mirror could be so horrifyingly hideous. She let out a shrill scream as she mindlessly clawed at herself, oblivious to the bloody gashes she was leaving on her own body, like she was trying to dig out the monster in her. As she attacked her own body, the monster in the mirror was also assaulting her mind, seemingly refusing to leave her alone. In the end, it looked like she was unable to withstand it any longer when she gathered all her remaining strength into her palm, and she delivered a strike onto her forehead. Her consciousness was obliterated, and her entire being dissipated into nothing but dust. Qingyu looked at the mirror she held in her hand and shook her head, looking a little sympathetic as she said, "How inferior does she actually feel about herself? To never have looked into a mirror, but to still end up dying because of a mere mirror. Mistress, for someone who is as beautiful looking as a goddess, like you will naturally not understand how much ugly-looking people care about their own looks." A tiny voice suddenly sounded. Qingyu arched up an eyebrow and seemed to have thought of something before she released the little toddler from the bottle. The little toddler with a fiery red body immediately drew in a long and deep breath blissfully, as if he had not breathed the air outside for too long, and then turned to look at Qingyu with incredibly grateful eyes. "Thank you, mistress, for letting me out. I will definitely carry out my mistress tasks dutifully in future to make up for the wrongs that I committed in the past." Qingyu scoffed indignantly. "I am giving you just one chance because you came up with the ploy this time. If you dare to defy me again in future, I will turn you into a cultivated elixir." The little toddler immediately looked fearful as he lifted his tiny hands to cover his mouth and shake his head vigorously. I wouldn't dare to do that anymore. I know now that that is Mistress Man and he cannot be eaten, cannot eat him." Uffed. Qingyu was tickled by his antics, and she decided to ignore him. Up till that point, Qingyu thought that it was time that she woke up. Otherwise, a particular man was going to worry himself to death. Just as Lu Junyao's face grew grim, and his body became stiff as a board, he then saw the eyelashes of the young lady in his arms flutter faintly, before she slowly opened her eyes. She has really woken up. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Upon seeing him, her lips curved up into a smiling arc as she called out tenderly, "Ayao." Lu Junyao's breath caught in his throat for a moment, and he then seemed to clench his jaws, but did not say anything. He embraced her more tightly, his head buried in her shoulder, and he then said softly in an aggrieved tone, "Little one, you almost frightened me to death." Everything had been good and well just before this. He had only not come to see her for a few days, and she actually dared to just fall unconscious before him like this. Looks like he had better come here every single night to see her. Sensing the worry the man was feeling, Qingyu stretched her arms out to hug the man, and said very gently, "I'm fine now. Chapter 286. 1. First time. Must be cautious. Feeling the young lady's arms curled around his waist to reassure him, the anger immediately drained out of Lu Junyao completely. He embraced her quietly for a while, and then released her slightly to ask, "What happened?" Qingyu curved up her lips in a smile. "It was nothing. Just a clown hidden up among the beams became impatient, and tried to find some trouble with me. That's all." With Qingyu so highly favored by Qing Luoyan now, people in the Divine Temple just could not wait to fawn on her and butter her up, so no one would be so foolish as to try anything funny on her in here at this time. Could it be? Lu Junyao's brows knitted up as he thought deeply about it for a while, before he then looked at her and said, "Someone from the Mind-Free Peak? But I have dealt with it," Qingyu said with an eyebrow raised, but wasn't all that surprised that the man was able to decipher it so quickly. After all, having already taken her mother away, their next target could only be little Belle and her. But she had not thought that they would make their move so soon. Upon thinking that, Qingyu's furrowed brows deepened as she looked worriedly at the man. "How is little Belle doing recently? Yao, you must definitely help me keep a lookout on him. I worry that those people will suddenly strike, and little Belle will be defenseless against them. You do not need to worry about him that much. He is not as useless as you think." You are just being overly protective of him here. Lu Junyao squeezed the young lady's cheeks gently, and his thin lips parted slightly as he said, "As a man, he needs to grow up sooner or later. When I was his age, I already went through so much more. Although you are his elder sister, you cannot decide his life for him forever. He needs to walk his future path on his own, and nobody can help him with that. Do you understand that?" Qingyu lowered her eyes, and her voice was soft as she replied, "I understand." Maybe in her eyes, Qingbei would always be a small and weak child that needs her constant protection. Seeing the young lady suddenly fall silent and glum, Lu Junyao could not help but curve up the corners of his lips, and lifted a hand to raise her small delicate chin up. His devilishly handsome face suddenly leaned in, and he pressed his forehead up against hers gently, his gaze indiscernible as he looked right at her. Qingyu was taken aback by surprise, the expression on her face bewildered. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. I discovered something. Lu Junyao suddenly said, his tone of voice serious. What? Although you haven't seen me for the past few days, you did not miss me even a tiny bit, but is being so concerned for that kid little Bei instead. Lu Junyao said without showing any expression on his face. His eyes then became sad as he looked at her and said, "Have you started to tire of me?" Lu Junyao's words were spoken mostly in jest, but it still carried a sliver of seriousness in them. After all, the lass was becoming less and less passionate towards him compared to the beginning, and that made Lu Junyao unable to help himself, but to develop self-depreciating thoughts, thinking maybe he was not attractive to Qingyu anymore. Chapter 286. 2. First time. Must be cautious, however. Hearing those words from the man, Qingyu became a little stunned at first, and her eyes then slowly curved into twin arcs, the corners of her mouth carrying a faint hint of a smile. When did you start to like thinking up such nonsensical thoughts? Are you saying that isn't the case? The man's face suddenly looked a little depressed and indignant. Then how are you going to prove that you still love me as much as the time when you confessed your feelings to me? How do you want me to prove it? Qingyu could not help but smile to herself. This fellow was being the prime example of a steady and mature person in self-reproach just a moment ago, but has suddenly turned so childish in a blink, which made her really not know whether to laugh or cry. The instant her voice fell, she saw the look in the man's eyes change, and he then held her down under the soft covers on the bed, his face barely inches away from hers, as he looked at her with an indiscernible smile. His well-defined fingers gently caressed the young lady's smooth cheek, as he said in a low mesmerizing voice, "I don't care. You neglected me so much recently, and I want it all paid back." Upon finishing those words, he went straight for the young lady's soft luscious lips, dominating that sweet honeyed domain in a slightly punishing manner. However, his ferocious actions did not seem to have frightened the young lady, but came to receive a tender response from her. Her slender arm slipped smoothly around the man's neck, passively submitting herself to his fierce initiative that washed over her like a storm, not resisting him in the slightest. Lu Junyao's pair of violet eyes immediately turned a deeper and more intense shade, gradually no longer just lingering on the young lady's alluring lips, slowly moving downwards, to gently take a bite on the young lady's soft supple neck. A low groan escaped out through the young lady's lips, a numbingly pleasurable sound. She had already not been all that well covered while she was asleep earlier, and with all the tossing and turning around now, the state of her clothes were in a frightful mess. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The young lady's beautiful and deeply etched collarbone with her snowy fair skin came exposed, the enchanting curve just under her collar, that drove one wild bewitching, and inextricably drawing the man's gaze to it. Without considering the young lady's alluringly mesmerizing countenance, it was as if every single part of her entire body had been exceptionally blessed by the Creator, more beautiful than a painting, like even glancing at her one more time was defiling that greatest epitome of perfection and beauty. However, that enchantingly exquisite prey was at that moment passively lying just beneath his body, subjecting herself to do as he pleased. In an instant, The man's usually lazy and nonchalant-looking handsome face became awash with thick and intense desire. Despite the many changes in the intensity of his eyes, he finally buried his head into the young lady's soft slender neck, panting a little depressedly, quietly trying to suppress the urge in him. Qingyu turned her eyes to gaze at the man lying on top of her, her luscious red lips pressed together in mirth, and her voice tinged with an alluring raspiness, just after the bout of intensely passionate exchange. What's wrong? Chapter 286. 3. First time. Must be cautious. Hearing the young lady's heart-stirring voice, Lu Junyao could not help but feel even more frustrated, and he said in a slightly admonishing tone, "Don't say anything." Qingyu blinked her eyes in innocence. What is going on with him? His face was just looking like he wanted nothing more than to eat her up, but he suddenly just stopped, and was acting so helpless and aggrieved. Listening closely to his voice, she could even detect a bit of frustration in it. In fact, she had not resisted or tried to stop him at all, did she? Even if he really did try to do anything, she might not come to reject it. She really loved him, and she did not dislike being intimate with him. So if they were destined to be together, then what did it matter if they became a little more intimate with each other? She wasn't really an ignorant young lady in her teens anymore, so she was very clear of her feelings for Lu Junyao. Throughout her previous life in this, she had only loved just this one person. She had not felt that kind of feeling even with little Yi, whom she had been closest to. The feeling where she missed him, loved him, and wanted to possess him. That's right. Not just men would think to want to possess someone. Women would similarly entertain thoughts of possessing another person. Because when one loved another person too much, they would want that person to belong only to themselves alone. Not to mention Lu Junyao's countenance, which even made Jingyu instinctively think that the man had seduced his daughter with his beauty. That would naturally have to be extraordinarily outstanding good looks, especially those violet eyes of his. When they looked at you so tenderly, it was feared that no single woman would be able to resist them. Though Qingyu and him had been around each other for a long time, but when she unintentionally meets with the man's eyes, she would still find herself almost bewitched by them. Those eyes really possessed some magical powers that could capture a person's soul. "Ayao!" Qingyu's voice called out gently. Seeing that the man did not respond, she ran a slender finger lightly over his broad back. She clearly felt the figure under her finger stiffen, like he was trying his very best to hold himself back or something. "Are you feeling all right?" Qingyu raised an eyebrow as she asked him in a soft voice. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Although she did not know very much about such things between a man and a woman, but there were certain parts of a man with strong urges that easily made them rash, and if they did not gain relief, it seemed like it wouldn't be good for their health. Thinking about that, Qingyu hesitated for an instant before she slowly opened her mouth to say, "Why not? I help you." "No need." Without waiting for her to finish, the man immediately spoke out to refuse. His expression was emotionless as he turned to glance at her and said, "I will not let something that is supposed to be so wonderful to be given up to your hand. We still have a very long road ahead of us." Hearing that, Qingyu was first stunned for a moment, unable to react to the unspoken meaning behind the man's words. And when she was able to react, her face immediately turned red, and she looked at him with indignant embarrassment. "How are you even able to spout such shameless words?" Chapter 286. 4. First time. Must be cautious. Lu Junyao raised an eyebrow, an innocent look on his face. "What is wrong with everything that I said? Wasn't what he said the truth? Or was it?" When that thought came into Lu Junyao's mind, the corners of his mouth suddenly curled up in a devilish-looking smile. "Little fox, tell me the truth here. Have you been frequently harboring thoughts of doing more intimate things with me?" "Shut up." Qingyu glared at him in indignance, pushing him away as she turned her head around, fully intent on ignoring the man. This fella is really being too much. It was clear that she had thought it might be too agonizing for him to endure it, and she was kind enough to want to help him. Doesn't he even consider that a young lady shouldn't be embarrassed like this? How could he possibly say such things aloud? No matter how much he wants it the next time, there was absolutely no possibility of it happening. Seeing the embarrassed and bashful little thing before him, Lu Junyao could not help but laugh affectionately as he stretched his arm out towards her and pulled her into his arms. Plopping half his body's weight right over the young lady, he then asked softly, "You're angry with me?" Although Qingyu was trapped under the man like that, she did not try to struggle, but just continued to ignore him. Lu Junyao lowered his head to kiss the young lady on her cheek and said in a soft coaxing voice, all right. It's all my fault, as I should not have made fun of you. Don't be angry with me, will you?" "I am not angry," Qingyu harumphed in an indignant tone. Lu Junyao laughed softly. "I'm relieved that you're not angry with me. You must know that your father is already quite displeased with me, and if I still go on to take liberties with you before I marry you, he will definitely not want to see me even more." Upon hearing that, Qingyu's brows creased together, and she opened her mouth to say, "I will get my father to accept you. You do not have to worry about that, as I will naturally not want you to feel aggrieved by that." Those words moved Lu Junyao's heart, but he could not help but sense that something didn't sound right. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. On the other side of the Mind-Free Peak, a strange phenomenon had appeared. An invisible distortion twisted up in the air, and the sound of an explosion boomed before fading away immediately. What happened? Every single person from the Mind-Free Peak possessed extraordinary powers that were closely linked to the very core aura in the Mind-Free Peak. Hence, though the Mind-Free Peak bestowed upon them unsurpassing powers, they were also intricately bound to the laws that existed in the Mind-Free Peak. And with that phenomenon that just happened, it seemed like someone from the Mind-Free Peak had just died, so the core of their powers in the Mind-Free Peak had similarly crumbled as well. Chapter 287. 1. Mastermind behind their deaths back then, but the ripple in the core that signaled the death of one of them had come from very far away, and had not happened within the Mind-Free Peak. What does that really mean? To think that someone among them in the Mind-Free Peak has died all of a sudden in the world out there. A woman who was taking a little nap suddenly opened her eyes clear and pristine like ice, shockingly beautiful. Just a brief glance into them, it seemed like one was gazing directly upon some boundlessly vast glacial plains, driving a chill deep into one's heart. The person outside seemed to have heard the soft sound of movement inside, and he came walking in slowly before greeting in a respectful voice. "Sovereign." This dignified silver-eyed woman was the highest authority here in the Mind-Free Peak. No one knew where she had come from, a person shrouded in deep mystery and highly unfathomable. The reason how the Mind-Free Peak had become the highest and unsurpassable realm throughout the entire lands was mainly because they had a ruler who held insurmountable power. No one knew her name, but everyone only addressed her as the Hell's Sovereign. The woman came down from her divan and walked out through the door, her eyes gazing far into the distance. Her eyes were expressionless, and it was impossible to read her mood. The person behind her stood there submissively with his head lowered, quietly awaiting for instructions. It was not known how much time had passed, so long that the person thought that the woman would not be saying anything else when he suddenly heard her voice. "Bring back the culprit." Her voice was emotionless, like she was incapable of feelings, so cold it penetrated right into a person's bones. Upon hearing that, the person behind her suddenly felt a chill run up his spine, before he bowed respectfully and acknowledged immediately, "I will." Sovereign had never cared whether these people in the Mind-Free Peak lived or died. The only thing that she cared about was the benefit they brought her. Every single one of them belonged to her, and even if she were to abandon them, nobody is allowed to touch them. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. It was clear that someone had overstepped those boundaries, and she is feeling rather displeased. Regarding the incident with the dead bodies at the intersecting borders, the Bright Moon Divine Temple had already put out an explanation for it. That spot was where the Mind-Free Peak would come to appear at, and it would happen very soon, within a period that nobody could possibly predict. The 5 great powers, together with a good number of independent cultivators, including some reclusive hidden family clans, have all started to activate their people, all of them moving towards the intersecting borders. From the look of things, they were all intending to dig in and plant themselves in that place and wait, so that they would not miss the Mind-Free Peak's manifestation. Chapter 287. 2. Mastermind behind their deaths. Back then, a blinding group of people in bright glittery gold could be seen coming from afar as they walked, a highly conspicuous and eye-grabbing color, with a great ferocious-looking eagle emblazoned prominently on their chests, the signature emblem that showed they were people from the Hunters Guild. Upon seeing that, some of the people could not help but go hide themselves far away from them, fearful of bumping into them. Although the Hunters Guild was among one of the 5 great powers, they had won their position only very much later, notoriously pegged with a bad name, and could not be compared to the other several powers. Although the Dark Lands was also known to be an evil unorthodox might, but they were a group of people with real capabilities. Between just the Hunters Guild's Zhuge Xiong and the Dark Lord Lu Junyao alone, there was already no way to compare the two of them. Not to mention the fact that Zhuge Xiong was once Lu Junyao's subordinate, his cultivation a good way below that of Lu Junyao's. Although the Dark Lord was arrogant and eccentric, who thinks nothing of anyone at all, he was however a lot more upright and aboveboard in his ways, while Zhuge Xiong's treacherous sly self was something everyone knew about. Moreover, the Hunters Guild's people were always loud and tried to maintain a high profile, like they were afraid that people would not know about them, making themselves a highly annoying and hated nuisance. The surprising thing was that Zhuge Xiong himself was one among this group of people, but looking at him, it was plain to see that the look on his face did not seem all that great. Having endured it the entire way, he finally could not hold himself back anymore, but went on to ask the man beside him, "Why do I have to come here with all these people? Who knows whether it's really true? Those guys from the Divine Temple are always up to their funny tricks, and I'm sure you're well aware of that as well." Even without needing Qing Luoyan to say anything, I know that those priests in that divine temple of hers are becoming more and more useless. So is it possible that they are really capable of divining where the Mind-Free Peak is going to appear at? Maybe it is just some half-baked explanation she has nonchalantly tossed out to deceive everyone. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Ew ho ho. Better safe than sorry, isn't it? I feel that whether what she says turns out to be true or not, we do not have much to do anyway, do we? What harm can it cause when all we have to do is wait for a period and see? The man said in a soothing voice with a smile on his face, a stark contrast against the agitated and frustrated Zhuge Xiong. The person who spoke was also wearing the Hunters Guild's uniform, the glittery gold a little gaudy looking. But worn on him, there was an indescribable kind of noble elegance, that gracefully handsome countenance exuding a sense of power. This person turned out to be Qing Tianlin. Upon hearing that, Zhuge Xiong knitted his brows together, and then said in a displeased tone, "That still doesn't mean that I need to come all the way here personally, does it? I am the Hunters Guild's top boss, and doing this is rather degrading to a person of my position and status." Chapter 287. 3. Mastermind behind their deaths. Back then Qing Tianlin laughed scoffingly, and went on to mercilessly expose the man's lies. "I think you're afraid that you'll feel embarrassed if you encounter people from the Dark Lands, aren't you? Or could it be you're afraid you'll run into your previous lord from the past and feel inferior before him, causing you to lose face?" Like he had struck the nail right on the head, Zhuge Xiong's face immediately changed. Seeing that, Qing Tianlin continued to laugh, not bothered by the look on Zhuge Xiong's face. "What is there to feel inferior about? That man is just slightly more fortunate than you in birth, and a little luckier than you, that's all. In everything else, the two of you are standing at the same starting point. He is the Lord of the Dark Lands, and you are the boss of the Hunters Guild, both the reigning leaders of powers who hold their own in these lands, so neither one of you is lower or higher than the other." Zhuge Xiong silently clenched his jaws. "But, no buts about it. You must remember this. You must definitely go into the Mind-Free Peak. Maybe you will find that you do not have to lower your head anymore after you go in there. Qing Tianlin curled up the edges of his lips to say with a faint smile. I will definitely go. Zhuge Xiong said, his fists tightly clenched up. Seeing that the man was no longer hesitating, Qing Tianlin nodded his head and smiled as he continued to say reassuringly, maybe you will also come to see that attendant girl you previously met in the Divine Temple in the near future, and find some relief from all that missing you've been doing as well. Why do you persist in thinking of the unhappy things? When he heard those words, the expression on Zhuge Xiong's face underwent an obvious change. He had found himself thinking of that girl ever since he saw her for the first time. Looks like what one cannot have will always be the best. So what if I do see her again? She admires Lu Junyao so much that she was completely unmoved no matter how much goodwill I showed her back then. When Zhuge Xiong came to speak about that, his face could not help but to show anger and indignance. Just because he has a mesmerizing-looking face, why must all these women be so shallow to become so besotted with his looks? Qing Tianlin's eyes darkened, shrouded by an indiscernible depth that stained those orbs. He then opened his mouth to say, admiration is just a fleeting emotion. When you become more powerful than that man, she will take the initiative to come win your favor. All women worship a man of power, and that is the norm. Admiration? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. He knew that that man had impure thoughts towards his Qing Qing, but Qing Qing would definitely not fall in love with a man that easily. Her heart was colder and harder than anyone else, so he was certain that she would not fall in love with anyone just like that. But if she really were to betray him, he will surely lose his mind so completely that he might do something beyond his control. Following at a distance behind the two of them was Shi Zhanchen, who overheard everything that they said. He noticed the insidious look on the man's face, and he could not help but feel a sliver of worry rise up in his heart. Qing Tianlin is a lunatic, and that was something he had known all along. But his life was bestowed onto him by Qing Tianlin, so he had never ever gone against the man, willing to do anything for him, even if he had to give up his life. Chapter 287. 4. Mastermind behind their deaths back then, but after meeting that young lady, that thought in his head was slowly and silently undergoing some changes. In the beginning, he learnt how to hide the truth. Then he learnt the manner of things that he must not do, the kind of things he shouldn't speak about, subconsciously trying to protect that young lady, not wanting her to fall to any kind of harm, despite the fact that some of his actions now had made him a traitorous turncoat. But he had already quietly made a subconscious choice deep in his heart. For her, he was willing to do things that might cost him his life. All he wanted was to see her be able to smile just as purely and guilelessly as always. She would forever be the gentle and tender-hearted one, who generously showed him warmth and concern without inhibition, to a person of unknown origins. An angel. He liked her, a liking that he only dared to keep buried deep in his heart, treasuring it carefully forever. Qing Luo Yan, who had been able to enjoy peaceful sleep for quite a long time, suddenly woke up with a start on this night. But what she saw in her dreams was not Qing Lanfei's face, and neither was it her godly father's disappointed and forlorn-looking face, but the face of someone she would never have expected, a person she had almost completely forgotten about. It was the culprit who put a spell on her back then. Originally, though she had felt rather aggrieved and resentful, she had never thought that she would turn into someone like this, a person that she herself was unable to recognize. How could she possibly have the guts and courage to murder her own blood sisters, and commit such great blasphemy as to kill one's own father? None of that was a result that she wanted, but it was not known from when it started. An invisible demon had suddenly appeared in his world, a ceaseless and bewitching presence in her mind and consciousness, that endlessly magnified the tiny speck of darkness that was in her heart initially. Her entire world then began to be filled with that voice. What light and holiness! Only the forbidden dark arts will give you might and power. No one will dare to cross you, and they will all submit themselves at your feet. Can't make it yours? Then destroy it, so that no one can get it. You only need to kill her, and that man will be yours to have. Disobedient? Then let him have a taste of the result of defying you. Whoever dares to stand in your way to stop you, just have them all killed. Kill anyone who defies you." In the end, she turned to become a bloodthirsty demoness who lived to kill. Her countenance that had originally been outstandingly pretty, looking gradually becoming more and more devilishly seductive, her charming beauty irresistible, till not the slightest sliver of a goddess divinity could be found on her anymore. To the extent that though none of that was what she really felt in her heart, but she thought that that was what her heart wanted. In the end, all those events back then, while she drifted hazily in and out of all that muddle-headedness, had all come to happen. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, and she would only come to feel so lost every time when she woke up from her dreams in the middle of the night. Till now she was still unable to decipher why that person had chose to seek her out, and why that person would use her to oppose Qing Lanfei and Mo Jingyu so strongly. Although she hated those two people who betrayed her, she had never really wanted to take their lives. But this mysterious person had sought to directly end their lives. It was probably because they were entirely innocent that the heavens did not even want to receive them, and have revived them, letting them live again. Chapter 288. 1. Sowing discord. This matter had been a thing of the past for a very long time. If she did not dream of this person now, she would probably have forgotten all about strange happenings. Qing Lanfei was merely just another goddess among many others in the divine temple, and it was only in the year that she turned 10 that an enormous change came over her. Before that, she was just a spoilt and willful fool. What was it about her that was worth those people keeping such a close watch on her to the extent that they wanted her killed? Wait a minute. The expression on Qing Luoyan's face suddenly became startled as something passed fleetingly in her mind, so fast that she did not capture it. Why hadn't she thought of it before? Qing Lanfei before she was 10 years old, and after she turned 10, the difference in the girl was not just merely a world apart. No, they were two completely different people. But everyone, including herself, had thought that it was because of the incident that caused her to fall perilously ill that brought about the complete change. But thinking back carefully about it, wasn't it a little too unbelievable? At 10 years old, it was not when one would still be blissfully ignorant, but many parts of their personality and thinking would have been deeply etched right into their bones, and no matter how they changed, it would not be that drastic. Qing Lanfei. Could she have? Like she had just thought of something absolutely incredible. Qing Luoyan's face turned pale and white, her irises in her eyes enlarged from shock. That bout of illness from the incident back then had not just caused Qing Lanfei insufferable trauma, but had killed her completely instead. And the completely different Qing Lanfei, who had appeared after that, was just another person in substitution. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. What those mysterious people sought had always been this replacement Qing Lanfei's life. Otherwise, why would a mere brainless fool call for them to go to such great effort to make use of her to get rid of Qing Lanfei? This matter was something that happened several hundred years back, but she had seen that mysterious person again now. Is this some ominous sign that something was about to happen again? Qing Luoyan got up and walked down from her bed to look up into the pitch-dark night sky outside the window, where a clear, bright round moon hung quietly. The moon that could be seen from the bright moon divine temple was mostly a full moon. That was because of its unique geographical position and some strange unknown reasons that allowed people from the divine temple to be able to see the moon in its most beautiful state, full and round, that usually signaled good tidings. But at that moment, the large rotund moon seemed to be lacking a small part of itself, seemingly cut off rather abruptly. Chapter 288. 2. Sowing discord. Qing Luoyan's limpid almond eyes reflected the beautiful moon, and the look in her eyes turned a little strange. A lacking moon. Every time the moon showed a lack, something big would happen. Like back at the time when she lost all self-awareness and killed her father and all of his old subordinates to completely take over the divine temple. She had thought all of that was what she wanted, but it turned out that everything then had happened according to a certain person's plans. She had always thought that Qing Lan Fei was pitiful and pathetic, but she was actually the most pathetic one. Right from the beginning till now, she had never known that she was just a pawn who thought she was very successful. Qing Luo Yin lips then curled up into a self-deprecating scornful smile. She raised her hand and looked at her well-maintained and fair-skinned arm, her beautiful fingers like those of a budding young woman. Sigh. How much blood had these hands been stained with? Senior, you're awake. Someone suddenly patted her cheeks lightly, and Qing Lan Fei opened her eyes that were heavy with grogginess, to see the pretty-faced woman looking at her with a concerned expression. Seeing her stir awake, the woman then blew out a breath of relief, before she stretched her hand out to stuff something into her mouth. It dissolved into effervescent air immediately in her mouth, before Qing Lan Fei was able to react, and entered straight into her abdomen. Qing Lan Fei's rather hazy consciousness immediately cleared up a little. That was, among all the things that Master gave me over the years, I finally found something that's useful. Your body is now too weak, and you will not be able to withstand this much longer. So let it nurse your body secretly without showing any signs on the surface. Ing Ji's melodious voice explained softly. Hearing that, Qing Lan Fei's brows creased up slightly. With you helping me like this, if you're discovered. So what? Ingo interjected, her face indifferent as she raised her eyes to look at the woman. I am not about to stand back and watch you die before my eyes. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The look on Qing Lan Fei's face changed slightly, and she moved her lips, like there was a lot that she wanted to say. But in the end, all that she could muster up was merely, Inge. Thank you. There is no need for any thanks between us. Inge replied. What's the situation like out there? Trapped in the flame-devouring ice demon, where she was not able to even see the light of day, Qing Lan Fei's cultivation and her willpower was slowly and constantly being chipped away, where she was no longer able to remember how many days it has been since she left, and how many days she had been in here. Her first and foremost worry on her mind was whether the mind-free peak has made any move towards her children. Chapter 288. 3. Sowing Discord. You have been here for an entire month, and the mind-free peak might manifest before the people within the next few days. When the time comes, those who are qualified to come in will in turn become the mind-free peak's fresh blood. Sovereign will then personally pick a few of them to experiment with. The so-called fresh blood were just lives that would be turned into weapons. Although they were perceived as the divine realm, people who came into the mind-free peak would not be able to receive any of the so-called treasures or the secret manuals, but merely become the mind-free peak's most excellent experimental specimens. After all, too many outstanding young youths have been selected all these years, but none of them have been able to last till that last final step. To be able to develop the most outstanding weapon, one must first undergo countless times of failure. The mind-free peak has never once given up on developing the strongest weapon, but that called for a lot of blood and countless lives to be paid in return for them to continue with that brutally cruel project. But people in the world outside knew nothing about that at all, and they all sought to come in here like moths to a flame. The moment that first step was taken, there was no way back for any of them. An overwhelming wave of sadness and panic suddenly washed over Qing Lan Fei deep inside her heart, and she grabbed at Ing Ji's hand in a fluster. Inge, if the mind-free peak really comes to make a move against my children, will you please do all that you can to help them? I still carry the flame element in my body, and you can use my blood instead. It does not matter how much you take, but can you not hurt them? They are innocent. Nobody has ever been able to change any decision once Sovereign has decided upon it. Inge lowered her head, her voice soft as she said, that is the case when they sought to get rid of you. It's the same now that they seek for your children to take your place. The only reason they have not killed a traitor like you till now is only because she feels that you are still of some use to her. Inge brushed off the dust that had caught on the hem of her dress before she stood up. The only thing you can do now is to pray in your heart that they can turn misfortune into blessing and come out of this alive. Senior, you're already in such dire straits here, and when that moment really comes, you might not even be able to save yourself, not to mention anything you can do for them. Upon saying that, Ingu turned herself around and slowly walked away from there. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. She continued to come see her for about an hour every day after that. And although Qing Lan Fei did not know it, most people would not be able to come here into the flame-devouring ice demon at all. So why was Ingu able to come and go as she pleased? And it seemed like she was not really affected by the arduous effects of the place. Maybe her cultivation had really grown over the past several hundreds years, and that was why she was not affected by the place in the slightest. Has the enchanting view of the moon put the Grand Priest in such a good mood to come out to admire the sight instead of getting some restful sleep? At the end of the stone corridor, isn't the man dressed in a suit of blue robes, standing with his head raised up as he gazed at the night sky, the Grand Priest Song Jian himself? Chapter 288. 4. Sowing discord. Ever since he lost Qing Luoyan's trust, he seldom showed himself before people anymore. Even when he came to encounter anyone, he would merely nod briefly in greeting, no longer his haughty and arrogant self, keeping a very low profile. But meeting him this time, he did not try to avoid her. Qing Yu curved up the corners of her lips as she walked slowly over to stand beside the man to gaze admiringly up at the full moon together, and said with a smile on her face, "I heard that the Grand Priest has great powers of divinity, and a mere astronomical phenomenon should not pose any difficulty to one of your skills. I wonder why is there suddenly a piece of the moon missing like that? Are you able to determine what is the reason for that? Don't you already know it?" Song Jian asked in an emotionless voice. "Know what?" Qing Yu raised an eyebrow to ask the man in return. Song Jian laughed scoffingly and turned around to look at her, a scornful expression on his face. "There is only you and I here now. Is there still a need for all this pretense? What is the Grand Priest talking about? I am really getting more and more befuddled." Qing Yu shook her head and said helplessly, "My priestly powers have been completely destroyed. Are you saying you do not know that?" Song Jian's mouth split into a sinister smile. "From the time that I went to the scroll chamber to ask you about getting the manual on techniques for priest, you were already aware of that fact, weren't you? Is it?" Qing Yu blinked her eyes innocently. "If the Grand Priest did not say it, I really wouldn't have known. After all, your actions did not show that anything was amiss." "Ha!" Song Jian seemed to be losing his patience, and there was not a single hint of a smile on his face anymore. "Stop playing games already. I just want to ask you one thing. What is it? What is the real cause of the Temple Lord's insomnia? Don't you think you should at least explain the real reason behind that to me?" Song Jian said in a self-depreciating voice. Looks like there is some redeeming quality in the man at least. She had thought that it would be a long time before he would come to react. Thinking about that, Qing Yu could not help but to put on a sweet, beautiful smile on her face. "How dull. I have been discovered by the Grand Priest." Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. It was really you that was up to no good." Song Jian's eyes flared wide in utter disbelief. That such a frail and innocent-looking little lass, who looked so pitiful all the time, a weakling who was lucky enough to come here from the lower realms, would actually have the audacity to do something like this. "Aren't you afraid that I will go tell the Temple Lord?" Song Jian asked in a deep voice. "So what if you do? Moreover, you wouldn't go tell her about it." Qing Yu then said smilingly, "Doesn't the Grand Priest hold the slightest bit of hatred against her deep in your heart at all? That woman only thinks of you when you are of some use to her, and at other times, you are abandoned and thrown out like old shoes. Hasn't the Grand Priest learnt to see what kind of a person she really is from this incident? Then it looks like I have really worked so hard at this for nothing." Chapter 289. 1. Early summer snow. Song Jian's face turned white for an instant. It was clear that Qing Yu's words had touched a sore spot in his heart. To Qing Luoyan, he was merely a pawn that was to be used, and had never once won the slightest bit of sympathy from her. Despite how he had done anything he could for her, without a single word of complaint for so many years, he had never once gotten her to look at him straight in his eyes. But he had never harbored any second thoughts about it before. And that was because he truly admired her right from his heart, holding her dear inside. Regardless of how ruthless and vicious she might seem in everybody else's eyes, he was the only one who saw her lonely figure standing by herself under the night sky, looking so frail and helpless. There were times that he thought that all her ruthlessness was just her way of protecting herself. And he firmly believed that he was at the very least still different from others deep inside her heart. But now, he was suddenly no longer sure. When someone who was able to help her better appeared beside her, she had not hesitated in the slightest to abandon him, not thinking of all that he had done for her before at all, to the extent that she would have him killed without even blinking if his presence came to impede her way forward. With that thought in mind, Song Jian's heart sank deeper and deeper into despair. Qing Yu looked on with amusement at the man's incessantly changing face, before she went on to say with a soft laugh, "Looks like I do not need to say anything more as the Grand Priest's mind has all cleared up." Song Jian's mind came to be pulled back to reality gradually, and he then looked at the young lady with a gloomy face. Who are you really? I fear to think that Yufan had not actually captured you back here to the Divine Temple by force, but you deliberately let him bring you here. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Qing Yu's eyes flashed with a glint as a corner of her mouth rose up slightly in a smirk, the smile on her face indiscernible. Moreover, the divine consciousness of the scarlet gold fiery phoenix that Yufan mentioned suddenly disappeared when you appeared. There has to be some mysterious link between you and the scarlet gold fiery phoenix, Song Jian said as he stared sharply at the young lady, his words incisive and clear. What strange things is the Grand Priest talking about again? I don't know a thing about whatever phoenix you are talking about, Qing Yu said with a shrug of her shoulders, the look on her face innocently puzzled. Song Jian scoffed disdainfully, knowing quite a bit of the young lady's propensity to act innocent, and went on to disregard her innocent-looking expression before he continued on to say, "If this was about some other matter, you might be able to bluff your way out of it. But it is not possible that you will not know anything about a spirit beast that has attained the super divine beast grade, like the scarlet gold fiery phoenix. In the scarlet gold fiery phoenix's entire bloodline, no matter whether in terms of cultivation or intelligence, they have far surpassed that of most humans. They are wild and highly untamable, extremely protective only of its master. Its noble blood and its heavenly blessed abilities has made it grow to become haughty and arrogant, never bowing its head to anyone, but only to its master." Chapter 289. 2. Early summer snow. Speaking up till that point, Song Jian turned his gaze to look at the young lady. Phoenixes are all able to resurrect, and as the scarlet gold fiery phoenix stands at the pinnacle of them all, it could not possibly die so easily. But the moment you appeared, its remnant consciousness suddenly dispersed and disappeared. What do you think that tells us here? Qing Yu smiled at him. What does it tell us? Seeing that she was still persisting in acting innocent and completely clueless, the contempt in Song Jian's heart increased as he opened his mouth to say, "It tells us that there could only be two reasons for that. First, you are the scarlet gold fiery phoenix's master. But that is not possible at all, because everyone knows that this divine beast came to acknowledge its master 500 years back, and its master was the godly lord's youngest daughter. But she has gone missing for a very long time, and is nowhere to be found. Second, you and the scarlet gold fiery phoenix share some kind of special link that made it trust you fully, or could it be?" Song Jian paused for a moment, and then leaned in slowly towards the young lady. Right in front of her face that showed a faint indiscernible smile, he gave voice to the suspicion he had held for a long time. That you are actually somehow related to the godly lord's youngest daughter, the 11th goddess who disappeared from the divine temple back then. I had the fortune to see this particular goddess once in the past, and I must say that the young Miss Yu Qing's eyes really look startlingly alike to the 11th goddess. Previously, hadn't Qing Luo Yin transferred this young lady to serve at her side, because she looked so much like that person in order to test her? Unfortunately, after such a long time, Not only had Qing Luoyin not found anything suspicious about the young lady, she had come to trust her fully instead. When Song Jian lost favor with Qing Luoyin, he came to receive scorn and contempt from people who even tried to hit him when he was down. But he still managed to calm himself down and found that many things about the young lady did not seem right. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Just the single fact how a weak and frail young lady from one of the lower realms could come to fare so well in cloud heaven, like a fish to water, was already unbelievable enough. He thought that after saying all that, he would see another expression on the young lady's face like panic or shock, and would lose her calm. However, Qing Yu merely quietly waited for him to finish, before she reached her hands out to clap a few times, before saying to him with a bright smiling face, "I had thought that the Grand Priest was the best at deciphering such astronomical phenomenons in the night sky, and would be able to predict whether it's a sign of blessing or calamity. Never did I expect the Grand Priest to possess such a fertile imagination as well, to come up with such a fascinating story, which makes me can't help but hold newfound respect." The lifted corners of Song Jian's lips that carried a tinge of mirth then froze in place, the look on his face suddenly looking horribly ugly. It seemed like he had not expected that after being so blunt and straightforward with his words, that the young lady's face could still remain unchanged, and to blatantly deny everything. If he had not discovered clues and telltale signs before this, he would have been completely taken in by the young lady's exquisite acting here. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.